do this quarterly roundtable for April. Glad to see everyone. As you know, we do this quarterly, a partnership between BEF and Forth for the utilities in the Northwest who buy power from Bonneville Power Administration. We've got 3 great speakers today. Thank you to the speakers for joining us and presenting today. Just a couple of announcements on the front end here. I know Symbiot is going to mention the Roadmap Conference coming up in May here in Portland. I think she will put that link to the Roadmap website in the chat. I also wanted to mention Michael Graham from Columbia Willamette Clean Cities and Western Washington Clean Cities is here with us presenting, and they do a great conference, the Green Transportation Summit and Expo in Tacoma in August. Very much focused towards fleets. So if your utility fleet is interested in electric vehicles, or if you have some private customers who have fleets looking at EVs, excellent opportunity there. And also just want to mention for those of you in Washington that the Washington Department of Transportation has announced their open applications for their Zero Emission Access Program, the ZAP program, which is a pilot for pilot car share programs. We have a couple of projects that Forth has worked with the city of Bingen and the city of White Salmon, who won awards for this program last time around. So if you're interested in car share in Washington, you should reach out to BEF or to Forth, and we'd be happy to support any activities there. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Symbiot to introduce our speakers. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And I will say, included in the Roadmap Conference, if you're local, we are also hosting a workshop on 5/15 for how communities could utilize the federal funding. If that is of interest to you or anyone in your organization, I will drop the link here as well. And we will include all of the links for the GTSE, for Roadmap, and everything Thomas mentioned. We will include that in the webinar and the recap. To start off, we have a great conversation started. We're going to be discussing how utilities can lead the way. We have Janae Zachrin, who is the Community Outreach and Engagement Specialist at Washington State Department of Ecology. She is going to be discussing the clean fuel standards along with, she works on other climate policies. Janae has a background in conservation and environmental engagement. We also have Hannah Morrison, city planner at the Portland Borough of Transportation. In addition to leading the policy development and implementation of the city's electric vehicle charging in the public right-of-way program, Hannah coordinates electrification projects citywide and engages key stakeholders to advise on projects, pursuing opportunities for collaboration and ensuring regional alignment. And finally, we'll hear from Michael Graham, the Director of Policy and Communications at the Columbia Clean Cities Coalition. Michael's career goal is to support fleet decarbonization and operational cost reduction through cost-effective alternative fuel solutions. And for now, I'll pass it to Janae. Janae, I am sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I wrote it out phonetically, but we will get our first presentation going on the Washington Clean Fuels.
Sounds great. Thank you, Symbiot. And I'm going to start sharing my screen now. All right, can y'all see my presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, fabulous. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Symbiot. As you mentioned, my name is Janae Zachrin. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Outreach Engagement Specialist for the Climate Policy section here at Ecology, and I do work on that Clean Fuel Standard program. I'm super excited to be here today and talk with all of you about our program, how it works, and how the utilities can participate. But first, let's quickly recap how this particular climate policy is designed to address the largest source of Washington's greenhouse gas emissions. In having a clean fuels program, Washington now joins other West Coast jurisdictions like California, Oregon, and BC, who also have programs in place. And beyond reducing emissions, the program does aim to encourage technological innovation in low carbon fuel space, as well as economic development, and to increase the availability and affordability of low carbon fuels. Now, for those of you who are maybe unfamiliar with what a clean fuel standard is, the CFS is what I'll be calling it from here on out, but the CFS is a market-based policy that will reduce carbon emissions associated with transportation fuels by 20% below 2017 levels by the year 2034. Now, this graph here shows that the standard or the required reduction percentage for each year of the program. Fuels with emissions above the standard incur deficits, and fuels that fuels with emissions below the standard incur credits. At the end of each compliance year, deficit holders have to purchase enough credits to zero out their account. Now, the market demand for credits creates that financial incentive for supplying low carbon fuels in Washington. And the program did go into effect this year on January 1st and requires a carbon intensity reduction of 0.5%. The CFS will reduce emissions by requiring a reduction in carbon intensity of transportation fuels. The carbon intensity of a particular fuel is calculated based on how much carbon is produced throughout the life cycle of that particular fuel. Now, those fuels that have fewer emissions throughout its life cycle will have a lower carbon intensity. For example, traditional fossil fuel production produces more carbon throughout its lifetime than, say, electricity produced through hydropower. Therefore, in this particular example, traditional fossil fuel production will have a higher carbon intensity, or CI, than that of the electricity. Now, this slide provides a list of fuels covered by the regulation. Any producer or importer of a fuel in the regulated fuels table on the left is required to participate. And any of the suppliers of a fuel in the opt-in table on the right can choose to participate. And as you can see, electricity is considered an opt-in fuel. And we'll talk about how you can benefit from this program in just a minute. But first, let me share some information about how the market works. Now, the first step to participating in the CFS is registering in the Washington Fuels Reporting System, or we like to call it WAFERS. Parties must register and then track their energy usage. For example, how many gallons of fuel are consumed, or in your case, how much electricity. Then they report to Ecology quarterly and annually on their energy usage. Ecology will review and verify the data and then issue credits based on the CI of the fuel and the amount of energy used. Then participants can post their credits for sale and negotiate a price with deficit generators who are interested in purchasing them. This is a market-based system, so the price is not set by Ecology, but instead based on the current demand for credits driven by the amount of deficits incurred that year. So let's dig into the different ways a participant can generate credits. Any transportation fuel that has a carbon intensity below the standard can generate credits for being dispensed into a vehicle. So electricity counts as a fuel if it is being used to charge a vehicle. Now, the second way is through what we call capacity credits or infrastructure credits. Now, these are offered for building out fueling infrastructure, though they will only be available for DC fast charging and hydrogen refueling infrastructure, and it will sunset over the life of the program. Now, the third way is through advanced credits, and these are almost like a credit loan based on the estimated credit generation over a set number of years. So, for example, say WashDOT is looking to electrify their ferry. They would estimate how much credit the project is expected to generate, and then Ecology would verify and give those credits in advance, which would then help that upfront cost of the conversion of the ferry. Then the ferry would not be allowed to generate credits until that credit loan is paid back. Now, this also is restricted to public projects and is meant to fund projects with a much higher upfront cost, but a significant reduction in carbon intensity. Now, once a participant sells their credit and receives the revenue, they may choose to use that money to purchase more vehicles that use low carbon fuel, maybe some infrastructure, or invest in the production of low carbon fuels, or reduce the cost of the low carbon fuels that they already produce. Which brings me to how electric utilities can participate and generate credits. So electric utilities can generate credits for electricity that's used to fuel a vehicle. And this can occur 2 ways. The first is through residential EV charging, and the second is through chargers that are owned by the utility company. So think about chargers for fleet vehicles that you own or public chargers. Both can be credit generating. Now, we know that many utility companies that receive power from another entity, that happens often. And if you're a distributor of the electricity that's fueling the vehicle, you are the one that's able to generate those credits. I also want to make it clear that in order to generate and receive credits, participants must report to Ecology. And this happens both quarterly as well as annually, which I'll dive into a little bit more detail towards the end of this presentation. Another key element of the program is the requirement for utilities to invest at least 30% of credit revenue that they earn in the program into transportation electrification in disproportionately impacted communities. Electric utilities are also strongly encouraged to invest 50% of credit revenue in zero-emission transportation for low and moderate income customers. Ecology and WashDOT are currently developing a list of project types that meet these requirements, and utilities will be required to report to Ecology on how they spent that revenue. Now, unclaimed credits that are not being claimed currently by a utility company will be gathered by something called the Backstop Aggregator, which is a nonprofit entity that Ecology will be appointing this year. The Backstop Aggregator will use the revenue from those unclaimed credits and then reinvest into projects that reduce emissions and expand the adoption of transportation electrification in disproportionately impacted communities. Additionally, to participate in this program, Washington does charge a fee. This fee does cover the cost of program implementation. Credit generators who are voluntary participants will bear a very small portion of the overall program cost, while deficit generators bear a much more significant portion. The first year of the program, so this year, we will only have a registration fee / participation fee. This 2023 amount is listed in that top table up there. And in the second year of the program, we will charge a small flat participation fee to all participants. And then deficit generators will be charged an additional fee based on the number of deficits generated. Now, this kicks in year 2 because we won't have enough data. We don't have data reported to us until later this year. And the deficit generator fee will be done in tiers, which you can see here at the bottom of the table, and that the top 30% of deficit generators will be paying the highest fee, and then it goes down from there. Now, lastly, I will share with you an overview of our program timeline. As I mentioned earlier that I would be talking about more reporting, here it is. Although this is a busy slide and has a lot of program deadlines, it does provide you the quarters that are divided up over our compliance year. As soon as each quarter ends, we require fuel suppliers to report all of their fuel transactions, and reports are due to us at the end of the following quarter. After we receive and verify each credit or each entity's quarterly reports, we then issue credits or deficits, we then issue those credits or deficits, which is why our credit market won't begin until after the data from the reporting entities is received. So beyond the quarterly reporting deadlines, which you see, I also have on here the April 30th annual report deadline. This is when the deficit generating entities have to report to us that they have retired enough credits to zero out their accounts from the previous year. And for 2023, as we're getting the program up and running, compliance obligations are actually going to be deferred until the end of 2024. I've also noted on here the February 1st date, which is when we will annually be posting the draft program fees, which kicks off the process for setting the fee. So this year we propose the fee, we have a 30-day comment period, and then the final fee is posted. And so we'll be repeating that every year. And finally, I also want to draw your attention to the October 1st deadline. This is important as it is directly related to utilities because you must notify us here at Ecology of intent to participate for the following year. Now, this is especially applicable to maybe some of those utilities who wanted to participate this year but didn't get in time or wanted to learn about it. So October 1st of this year will be your deadline to let us know that you want to participate in 2024. The October 1st deadline will be the same deadline each year going forward to let us know that you want to participate for the following year. And that does conclude my brief presentation today. I would love to open this up for questions. I also was going to drop in the chat here in just a minute some links to my email. So if there are additional, obviously, email questions, you can email me. And then we have our CFS webpage that I'm happy to drop the link to, as well as signing up for our email list that we send out lots of communications about. So thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. We will now open the floor up for Q&A about the the Clean Fuels standard and program. If you have any question, you can use the hand raising button to raise your hand and we'll direct you to ask your question. If you don't want to be on camera or don't want to unmute, you can also type your questions in the chat and we will get to them now. I will just give a pause because I see a question in the chat already. So while everyone's formulating their questions, I will start with this. As we understand, registration is based on federal EIN and only one registration for FEIN. How are the equity provisions handled with a utility and city government share registration? Will all credits be required to meet the equity provisions or only those generated by the utility?
Okay, that is a good question. And I'm looking at it just again also in the chat so I can make sure I try to do my best to answer. So the registration question, there may be some more technical information required that I am less familiar with because I don't actually handle registration myself, but I can tell you that the equity provisions are strictly related to the utilities that generate credits. So if the utility company is the one that is listed in as the registered participant, then the credits generated from those utility or from those electricity used to fuel the vehicle, those would be the ones that are subject to that 30% requirement. And then let's see, how are equity provisions handled when a utility? Yeah, and I'm not sure. I think that it would probably come down to actually who owns the chargers. So it depends on, again, how the credits are being generated with the city government and the utility. There's probably some very pieces that can get broken out. And if you want Brianna to email this question to our CFS at ECY email, I'd be happy to get more specific detailed answers to that first question because I'm not 100% sure when it's a city and a utility sharing a registration. Is that helpful, at least somewhat?
Thank you. I see a hand raised, Thomas.
Let's see. Thanks for the presentation. Excellent. One quick question. I know in the Oregon program, utilities receive credits based on the number of light-duty electric vehicles that are registered in their service territory. And I think it's based on the average CI for the utility, which BPA utilities do better than the investor-owned utilities in Oregon. So is that a provision in the Washington program, or is it only the amount of power that goes through chargers?
As far as I know, as my understanding is that the provision will cover electricity used for, so if it is going through residential EV charging versus the owned charger, I think that kind of splits that up to potentially. But my understanding is that the CI is calculated based on the service area, and that's how it will be. The credits are calculated is based on the service area, and and we are still figuring out what that matrix exactly looks like and finalizing that. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. I think it is that. So yeah, did I answer that or no?
Well, the specific question is, will utilities generate credits just by virtue of the number of light duty electric vehicles that are registered in their service territory? In Oregon, DEQ keeps a list that you can see online that lists out how many light duty electric vehicles are registered in each utility territory. And I can't remember, some of the utility people on the call from Oregon might know, but each light duty EV generates a certain number of credits for the utility every year.
Right. Okay. Yes. So we are still determining the exact way that they are going to calculate out what that looks like. And I know that we are referencing how how Oregon and California have done that. We have not finalized exactly if it's going to be via the light duty number based on the number of light duty vehicles in that area. We have not finalized it, but it will be based on, what amount of electricity is an average likely of what electricity is being used for EVs, and exactly how that is being parsed out, I don't have the answer to yet.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I see a hands up from Brianna Chance.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Just in response to that question from Thomas, my understanding is that it will be those will be base credits similar to Oregon and California based on registered EV registrations at residential properties. So I think that's something that we're really interested in continuing a conversation about, because we do have a fair number of multifamily properties as well where there are registered EVs, as well as those light duty fleet vehicles. So yeah. Interested to hear more as ecology moves forward.
Yeah, and I know our technical team is working really hard right now. We've been waiting on data. We got the data. We're diving into it, and we did submit share the data for CI out with our utilities companies, and our team is working really hard to figure that out. And I know that they are taking into consideration EV registrations within the service territory, but exactly how it's going to parse out, I don't have that that information yet. I just don't have it. If I did, I'd share it.
One more quick comment that, and Michael Graham might be able to back this up a little better, but in Oregon, I believe each registered EV with the current credit value is worth around $400 a year. So, for a small utility with a utility with 1,000 EVs is worth, quite a bit of money. I think communities like, I see Ashland on the call. I think Ashland generates quite a bit of dollars for a small city, and someone like eWeb, I think, generates over $1 million a year just in their credits. So this is a really great program. I'm so excited Washington has this along with Oregon and California, and it can be a real boon for the utilities and their ability to invest in EV infrastructure.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and we've seen a lot of success in Oregon with utility companies and even with their reinvestments. So it is very exciting, and we're looking forward to seeing what the outcomes are here in Washington.
Any additional questions before I take over moderator privilege and ask some of my questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised, but I have one question. How does the CFP or the Clean Fuel Standard work with complementary policies to create an electrification ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you for asking it. So as everyone may or may not be aware, Washington has a whole suite of climate policies that have come out in the last year or so, and they're all, different, but have, similar goals. And so I think that, there's different state agencies that are also working to electrify. So if you've heard of the CETA, Department of Commerce has the Clean Energy Transportation Act that's also working towards electrification. There's also the EV Council that has convened and is working towards electrification. So I think that there's just a lot of really great policies that are working towards electrification, and we have different pieces and parts that are working towards getting that across the entire state and having provisions that also will, help electrify those communities that maybe have historically not had access to these types of technologies. So I think that there's a lot of different ways, and we could probably have an entire conversation just about that, and it would be a really great conversation. And we talk about that even internally right now, about how do we, get the word out about how all of these different programs do kind of work together. And some of it right now is that we're working really hard just to get these up and running and get them in place and communicate with each other about how we can coordinate and get these get the electrification out in a smooth, solid process, but also have it be successful and useful for all the communities out there.
Thank you. And lastly, I know you mentioned in the presentation, electric utilities must invest 30% of credit revenue in overburdened communities. So my final question would be, how is that being ensured, that 30%, and that it will be supporting underserved, overburdened communities?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and something that we are taking very seriously. And we are working with the Washington Department of Transportation to develop a list that meets a certain criteria. We have that, again, we're currently working to develop that list of what it means to actually implement something that's successful in those areas. And then of course they have to report to us. So we will be checking and making sure that they are spending the revenue as they are supposed to be spending it, in line with the list of approved projects. And I think in this instance, one of the things that we're really excited about is that Oregon does have a very successful model, and seeing the community response to the investments that they've had has been very positive. And so we're optimistic that we'll also see the same impacts in our local utilities and their communities when they see that their company now looks very positive because they have used that revenue to invest in something that's going to benefit their community and give them access to be able to have clean air to breathe by removing that climate pollution from transportation. So I think that that's a really, really great thing that we're working towards. And again, we are going to be learning along the way as we continue to implement and see how we can improve. But we are working really hard to make sure that the people that need to have access to this, these types of services and technologies are able to do that. So yeah, I think hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you. A question just popped up. With this oversight, will there be audits for projects?
That's a really good question, and I don't know the specific details of what an audit might look like, but I know that, again, in that reporting process, they must be required to tell us how they've shared that revenue. I don't know the ins and outs specifically of you have to meet this, this, and this, because we're still developing what the list actually is and how that process will look.
Thank you.
Hey, this is Jordan. Sorry, I asked that question. Just a quick follow-up. So, but will there be like some sort of criteria for how we spend all the funding, whether it's, in an overburdened community or any kind of project, to document that?
It is just that 30% that's required, and then the 50% is encouraged. And so that's actually in the statute, and we're required to make that part of the rule, is at 30% of the revenue. So if you make, $100,000 in credits, I'm just making this up, $30,000 of that must be reinvested back into overburdened communities by meeting a project within the list that was developed by Washington Department of Transportation and Ecology. And my understanding is that the list is going to be a project list that gives a lot of flexibility, but it also has stringent goals to meet, if that makes sense, so that you can build programs that work for your communities, but will actually help provide these offerings and investments of clean technologies to these communities.
But for other communities that fall outside of that, we can overlay those same criteria and create like consistent messaging for customers who want to participate in different programs.
You mean the 30%?
The 50% or anything else for other folks?
Yeah, so utility companies are the only ones in credit generators that are required to reinvest that 30%. Other credit generators are not required to, only utility companies. That's part of that statute.
Got it.
That makes.
Thank you for the answers.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you. I am not seeing any other question, but before we pass it over, any last or final words you want to let our attendees know before we pass it over?
I just, again, thank you so much. There's a lot of ins and outs to this program, and our technical experts know a lot of those details much more intimately than I do. So if you have questions that you're unsure of, please reach out to us using the email that you see on the website. I'll drop those in a chat as soon as I'm done here sharing my screen. And then also, if you want to be a point of contact for ecology to reach out to you and you don't get current communications from us, definitely let us know that too. We have a utility specific contact list that we use to reach out outside of our general email list, which I will also drop in the chat for you to sign up for just the general Clean Fuel Standard email. So yeah, I think that's it. Just if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We encourage participation. We're excited about our program. The team is working really hard to get through all of the technical aspects of getting this program up and running and successful. So we're excited to work with you all as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now I will pass it over to our next speaker, Hannah Morrison, who will share some lessons learned best practices from the Portland PBOT, Portland Bureau of Transportation, and the Portland General Electric Electric Avenue pilot.
All right, thank you. Okay, looks like my screen's good. Okay, thank you. So as Cynthia said, I'm Hannah Morrison. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm really excited to be here today kind of talking more about EV charging in Portland. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to cover today. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about our general EV strategy, electrification strategy, and then talk about some of the PGE pilots that we have worked on in the city of Portland, and then our kind of new EV charging in the right-of-way program. So just briefly, our policy mandates that guide the city in kind of pursuing electrification date back to the 2015 Climate Action Plan, which really led into the 2017 EV strategy that really more fully outlined all of the different steps that we need to take to electrify. And then they've been integrated into plans kind of since. So our transportation system plan, our strategic plan, we've really tried to reiterate the where electrification needs to fit in. And then most recently, that was reiterated in our climate emergency work plan, which was passed by City Council last summer and committed us to carbon emission reductions of 50% by 2030 and net zero by 2050, or sorry, 2035, apologies, and net zero by 2050. So just to look a little bit at our overall strategy, EV adoption fits into the city's three-part strategy to advance transportation and climate justice. The strategy also includes planning and building connected communities, reducing miles driven, and shifting to clean fuels and vehicles by electrifying all remaining trips. And this three-part strategy really aligns strongly with a new federal blueprint for transportation decarbonization, which is a document published jointly by EPA, HUD, Department of Energy, Department of Transportation earlier this year. And it also calls out transitioning to zero emission vehicles and electric fuels or alternative fuels. And it really highlights that transition to EVs is expected to drive the majority of the US's near-term emission reductions. So just again, kind of something that we all need to be focusing on. So I think it's helpful to kind of look holistically at the front and all the citywide toolbox of our electrification solutions. So, in order to ensure that we have this equitable transition to electric mobility and we really achieve all of our carbon emission reduction goals, we have a lot of work to do across bureaus and working with partners like our local utilities. And so we really just have to do a lot of collaboration, and we're lucky in Portland to have some great partners so that we can pursue kind of all these multiple facets of electrification. And while, of course, we can't do everything and we still have to prioritize, we are able to move forward in several areas that you see here, largely because of many of our partners like our local utilities. So on the left, we have in blue our Department of Transportation, our Bureau of Transportation projects. I'll be talking more about the EV charging and the right-of-way code project later. We also updated our kind of encroachment manual and administrative rule to allow for folks to charge curbside by running an extension cord across the sidewalk, provided that they use an ADA compliant cord cover. That's the cord cover allowance. And then, our Bureau of Planning and Sustainability's most recent project is in green, the EV Ready Code project, which requires that all new construction with 5 or more units that also has on-site parking needs to have kind of conduit laid at construction to ensure that the project is EV ready and it's easier to install those EV chargers later on. And I know that's something that especially multi-unit charging is something that a lot of utilities have been talking about in their TE plans. And then in orange, we have kind of all of the other modes of electric mobility, which is something that we, try to stay inclusive and talk about because it's really important. So our streetcar is all electric. TriMet's Max is already electric, and we're trying to help TriMet electrify their bus fleet. And our micromobility in the city is also pretty electric. So we have Biketown recently shifted to an all e-bike fleet, and we support e-scooters. And then in pink, we have some of these state and federal opportunities, which I'm sure many of you are also familiar with and thinking about. And then kind of as I've mentioned in previous slides, it's really important to think about transportation electrification holistically and recognize that there are so many entities that we need to coordinate with. And I think that, just this panel even shows all of us are from completely different areas and groups. It really shows how important it is to have so many different groups involved. So, from local municipalities to all the way up state and federal, our utilities and nonprofits and community groups, I think it really thinking about what everyone can bring to the table is valuable. And I just wanted to finish talking about our general electrification strategy by highlighting the importance of ensuring that this process is equitable. The benefits of EVs really should be accessible to all Portlanders. EVs have, those lower maintenance and fuel costs. They'll result in cleaner air, and it allows folks to participate in our climate goals. And we have seen in Portland that the market has driven the installation of EV chargers to areas where there's already been adoption of EVs, which of course, those areas will have higher utilization and those chargers will be more profitable, but this is creating charging deserts in some areas of the city. And these charging deserts happen to be often in areas where residents lack access to home charging because they live in multi-unit dwellings or single-family homes that don't have a garage or driveway. And also they're often areas that lack frequent transit and adequate bicycle infrastructure. So they're areas where people are going to continue driving their personal vehicle for a long time. So it's really crucial to electrify kind of those areas and step in as the city or as the utility. And this is an area where we've been lucky to kind of have such a partner that's dedicated to equity. All right, and now I wanted to dive into our kind of pilot program, the PGE pilot programs that we've been supporting. And this dates back to Electric Avenue 1.0, which was actually opened in August 2011. So this was a partnership between the City of Portland, Portland General Electric, and Portland State University. It was supported by many others. And to our knowledge, it was the first publicly accessible fast charging site in the public right-of-way in the nation. And kind of appropriately, it was a test bed, and there were a lot of lessons learned on this site. So as you can see, it was kind of on Portland State University campus, which is right in downtown Portland. It was on this street that actually used to have a two-way traffic flow, but was converted to a one-way traffic flow and angled head-in parking on just one side. And that really, is the most appropriate kind of traffic pattern for this fast charging. So you can see kind of in this image, there were, I believe, 2 fast chargers, 5 level 2 chargers, and even 2 level 1 chargers. Once again, this was about 12 years ago, so I don't think you really see public level 1 chargers anymore, but we did there. And so this project was on this site from 2011 to about 2015. And that was due to kind of some PSU building construction. And we really took that opportunity of having to move Electric Avenue to reflect on some of the lessons learned. And one of the really great things about this first project was that PSU was a partner And, they wrote many research papers on it and kind of studied it. So some of the lessons learned that PSU kind of pointed to, a lot of them were around clarity and standards. And that's very understandable since we were kind of so early on. So there was need for clarity around payment systems, kind of standards around parking spaces, the signage, wayfinding. There was a noted need for education around how to charge your vehicle, which is something that I think does remain. A lot of these things, even though they were noted as lessons learned back in 2011, a lot of them do remain today. And they're things that we're just still, actively working on. So, it was noted that maintenance and upkeep was a bit more of a burden than expected, and you really need to kind of dedicate standards to that and set a regular schedule, be responsive. And then finally, they noted that city code would need to change to support EV charging kind of more widespread before any kind of an expansion. And so some of these lessons learned were taken to heart when Electric Avenue was reopened just about a year after this site closed. It was reopened in a nearby location, still downtown, at PG, kind of near PG's headquarters. And so Electric Avenue 2.0 was opened with 4 dual port DC fast chargers and 1 dual port level 2 charger. And this time they were all kind of the same company. So there was some clarity around how to charge. There was more clarity around the payment systems. And we have worked to kind of provide standardization with the parking signage. All of these spaces are 2-hour parking limits, EV charging only. And another interesting thing about this site that I think is worth just bringing up is that PGE obviously is regulated by the Oregon Public Utility Commission. So how they charge consumers for EV charging is regulated. And that's just kind of another benefit for us working with utilities, is knowing that these rates will be reasonable. And so currently PGE's Schedule 50 says that level 2 charging is a flat $3 per session. DC fast charging is a flat $5 per session. And then on peak hours are an extra 19 cents per kilowatt hour. But they also offer the option to have a monthly membership of $25 per month, unlimited charging at either the level 2 or DC fast charger for Electric Avenue. And we've heard from many Lyft and Uber drivers through our private for hire advisory committee that they use those memberships and the fast chargers frequently during their shift. So they have been kind of well utilized. All right, and then wanted to shift gears to talk about one more PGE pilot, and that is the pole mounted chargers. And we had PGE opened kind of 2 of these project sites in October 2020 in Southeast Portland. Each was a single port level 2 charger mounted on a utility pole. And the primary goals of this program were to identify utility operational considerations for deploying chargers on utility poles, to really see if this would be a cost-effective, good for the consumer thing that they'd want to scale up. To identify city operational considerations, to think about our permit process, kind of how this could integrate into other utility permit processes or anything else with the city. To evaluate kind of customer awareness, see how popular these charges were, are they something that are desired, and to evaluate the economics of pole charging and some potential business models. So about 2.5 years in, we can safely say that they have been very successful. In fact, one of these chargers was the most used level 2 charger in PGE's whole network during the pandemic. I think that several of the lessons learned probably should look familiar to you. As I mentioned with the first Electric Avenue, we're still working on the same things. So we still need standardization. Standardization is needed on the utility side for installation and work practices. I think there's great potential there that PGE has noticed. The first pole mounted charger took about 3 hours to install, but the second only took 90 minutes. So kind of as they scale and standardize all of those practices, I think it'll get even faster. The charger design is something that has been noted as needing to evolve. There were everything from vandalism concerns to safety concerns around the tripping hazards of the cord. As many of you probably know, the port location for chargers is kind of different on almost every model of EV. So we're stuck with this kind of tension of wanting to make sure that the charging cord can reach all sides of the EV, but also will not be a tripping hazard and will be ADA compliant. So for an expansion, PGE has a new charger model that will be installed higher up the pole. And our new program that I'll talk about in a bit actually will require companies, or likely will require companies, to demonstrate some sort of cord management system that shows that their cords can reach any side of the vehicle, but also that they won't be a hazard. And then the parking space striping and signage, we have kind of standardized our signs. We will be requiring wayfinding on surrounding streets to direct people to EV chargers, just like we kind of direct people to gas stations and let them know where the nearby amenities are. And all of this, kind of the outcome of this, is that PGE is likely to prioritize their resources for pole-mounted EV chargers specifically due to the cost effectiveness. And it seems like this will happen even over more DC fast charging. So PGE found that the public level 2 chargers on pedestals can cost anywhere from $4,000 to $11,000, and that might even be a conservative estimate. And that's for electrical upgrades and construction costs. Whereas this pole-mounted level 2 charger that they can just kind of mount on their existing utility pole, it can be installed for $2,000 to $4,000 per port. And there is even the opportunity to reduce costs at scale even further. And then finally, kind of once again, another similar lesson learned as Electric Avenue, PGE and PBOT realized that if this program is going to scale, the permit process has to be streamlined. And utilities and municipalities really need to work together closely on how this program will scale. And that's already happening on both sides. So PGE is working to expand this program based on the success. They actually filed an expansion of the municipal charging collaboration program, as they're kind of now calling this, in their monthly meter charge budget this spring. And then it will be further expanded and included as part of their transportation electrification plan. And Pacific Power has also been kind of noting the work in this space and is also including a public charging program in their transportation electrification plan. And on the municipal side, we are wrapping up nearly 2 years of policy development for our new EV charging and the right-of-way program, which will have a kind of streamlined permit process. So what I want to jump into next and just give you an overview on. So for this, we will be allowing pole-mounted level 2 chargers, as we think the utilities are very likely to prioritize, but we will also be allowing level 2 chargers on pedestals in the right-of-way. And that was one of the kind of early key decisions that we made, was that we would be prioritizing level 2 chargers, not DC fast chargers. I think similar to, one of the biggest things that we learned from Electric Avenue and this pole-mounted charger is kind of the difference in where level 2 chargers can go versus DC fast chargers. DC fast chargers require so much more energy, and so they're kind of restricted in where they can go around the city. And also they're just kind of best suited for head and angled parking, and Portland does not have much of that. And our policy is really geared towards providing EV chargers kind of close to areas where people can't charge at home. So multi-unit dwellings and kind of in these dense areas. So it didn't make much sense to pursue DC fast charging. And another kind of key decision that we made is based on the success of these pilots with PGE, we had willing partners. We knew that PGE and Pacific Power would be interested, our local investor-owned utilities would be interested in providing this service. So we decided that the city, rather than, own, operate, or maintain any EV chargers, we would step back and really just be the regulator, the permitter, and kind of like oversee the program. And our local utilities and any other EV charging companies that are interested will be the ones that will actually own, operate, and maintain this infrastructure. So as I mentioned earlier, access to EV chargers in Portland is not currently equitable. And that was another driving force for this program and kind of an early guiding kind of principle for our EV charging in the right-of-way. This map shows all of the areas that are highlighted in green, red, and yellow. Those are areas where chargers will be allowed. I mentioned that we really wanted to use this program to provide public chargers for people who cannot charge at home. And so these are kind of the dense areas of the city that are zoned for multi-unit dwellings. And so that's kind of one of the limiting factors. And you can see that the areas in green have over 5 public EV chargers, the areas in yellow have 1 to 5, and the areas in red have 0 publicly accessible EV chargers. So we really have a lot of these charging deserts starting to form. And in these charging deserts, I think most of you would probably be familiar with this kind of chicken and the egg problem where, if there hasn't been a lot of EV adoption, then an EV charging company doesn't want to go in and put a charger in that might not be utilized. And then people aren't going to adopt an EV. So we can really kind of step in at this place. And I think that this is an area where the city and the utility can step in and, really provide that clarity to the market. Say, here are areas where we do want EV chargers, and really help kind of start to drive that demand. So with our program, as I mentioned, kind of the charges will be allowed within a center. So these areas that are zoned for multi-unit dwellings, and then kind of on and around the corner context. So kind of instead of on Main Street, just around the corner. And then we have a whole suite of clearance requirements for health, life, and safety, for ADA accessibility, and parking standards to ensure clarity for the public. And then this goes kind of hand in hand with the utilities, who have a whole other suite of standards around, the age of the pole, the utility pole, kind of the electrical capacity of the area, and, kind of all of these other things. So it really are kind of a key partner in this program. And then just a quick overview of kind of how the permit process will work. That, I mentioned that it's was a key kind of outcome that we needed to streamline this. So we've rearranged things so that all the negotiation is really upfront. So companies and utilities will need to obtain a franchise or a license for operating in the right of way. Then everyone will kind of jointly negotiate this master lease agreement, which will have data sharing standards, maintenance requirements, insurance requirements, everything you would expect. And then once that is upfront taken care of, companies will just need to submit a site-specific permit for each location. We will review, ideally quickly, and get it back out to them. And so hopefully kind of this is resulting in a more streamlined process where we can kind of really deploy that infrastructure quickly where it needs to go. All right, and that was it kind of in a nutshell. So I wanted to open up for questions.
Thank you so much for the presentation. We will now, similar to what we did before, open the floor up. Please raise your hands if you have any questions, or just unmute and we can start. Okay.
Hey, Hannah. My name's Jordan. I work at Tacoma Power, up in Tacoma, Washington, surprisingly. So we're kind of dipping our feet in this space with pole mounted chargers, but you mentioned that your pole mount and some of the pedestals are coming off of utility infrastructure, aka like T&D infrastructure. Did you have to have any conversations with the utilities down there on using their pole, their linemen, things like that?
Yeah. So the city, we're really letting the utilities kind of take that on. So the utilities are likely going to be the only ones that will be installing their infrastructure on their poles. We're not trying to coordinate kind of private companies installing their own infrastructure on utility poles. We are going to be working with both private companies like a ChargePoint or a Blink or something that want to install a pedestal EV charger and kind of connecting them with the utilities on that.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Jordan. I don't see any questions I see a hand. Thomas.
I'm curious. So the PGE will install them. The city owns the chargers, or PGE owns the chargers?
Yeah, PGE will own them. So whoever kind of applies for the permit will install, own, operate, maintain, kind of have all of that responsibility. We're really just kind of, we'll be permitting them.
Excellent. And it was interesting to hear you said one of the pole mounted chargers was the most used level 2 charger in the city. What kind of utilization rate did it have?
Yeah, it was the most used in PGE's network.
Okay.
So I don't have the data for that charger specifically, but I've heard anecdotally from people that live nearby that like it is there always is someone parked there pretty much. They're in really kind of dense neighborhoods that don't have a lot of home charging. So they seem to be very well used.
That's really interesting because so often EVs are gaining ground quickly, but utilization, a lot of chargers don't pencil if they don't surpass a certain level of utilization. So that's really interesting to hear that it clearly was convenient. It clearly is convenient. It's getting a lot of use. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I see a hand raised from Coral.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation, Hannah. That was really interesting. I'm assuming that these chargers are not metered.
Yeah, so the current pilot program, they're not in metered parking. And I assume that's what you're talking about?
Correct. Yeah. Well, I was wondering, maybe it's different for investor-owned utilities, but I'm like, who pays for the electricity? Because on the public side of things, that would be considered a gift of public funds and would be a challenge that I don't think the publics in Washington could implement. So I was just kind of curious what the conversations were surrounding that.
Yeah, so the pilot kind of pole mounted pilot program, it was actually free for the first year from October 2020 to October 2021, just to kind of see how the usage would pan out. And then when they changed it over to kind of charging for the electricity based on the Schedule 50 that was passed by the Public Utility Commission, it seems anecdotally, I have heard that kind of usage did not really take a hit. Like it's still very well utilized. That's something that PGE could probably share if anyone kind of wants to follow up on that. But we will be basically both the PGE and the Pacific Power owned chargers in the public right of way will, be governed by their schedules that are passed by the PUC. And then the private companies, we're kind of still figuring out exactly how it'll work, but they will likely charge drivers.
Okay, another question I had as I think about, doing something similar in our service territory is, and I think you might have touched on it a little bit, are the chargers subject to vandalism? And are there a lot of repairs that have to take place, or has that been not a problem so far?
Yeah, I think we've been lucky that we have not seen a lot of problems with that. I've heard from many other jurisdictions that has been an issue. So it is something that we've been thinking about. I think the most common vandalism that we've seen are the cords being cut. So we actually had a conversation with a new company that actually is cordless. They just put out the charging post and they supply people with the cord that they kind of drive around with in their car. And that's kind of one way around it. So yeah, we've been lucky with the current pilots to not have to experience that. Another way that PGE is going to get around that, when they expand their pole mounted chargers, they're actually going to look at a new model of charger that's installed about 10 feet up the pole and just has charging cords that drop down. And so they're hoping that would further kind of protect them from any vandalism.
Very interesting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
There's a question in the chat. Is PGE using networked chargers to track the electricity usage? And there's more to that, but I'll just ask the question first.
No worries, I've got the chat open so I can see it as well. I believe they are, because we have talked about kind of seeing that data, but we haven't gone forward with that. So that's something I could follow up with PGE on though.
Yeah. I have one personal question, moderator privilege, and I have multiple, but I wrote everything into one. I would ask, what are the biggest lessons learned from this project in general, with the sense of what partnerships, funding, everything together into that one question?
Okay, yeah, just a super easy question. I mean, I think that like partnering with everyone is one of like the biggest lessons. Like, I just can't understate the importance of collaboration and how many different people that we had to talk to. I kind of mentioned that this took 2 years of policy development. And it's everything from like on the city side, talking to our treasury team about how to manage people, drivers parking in a metered parking district and paying for charging, and if we could merge that, and talking to our urban forestry team about potential conflicts with street trees, and to our parking team about standardizing like their maintenance operations of striping the space, and then also everything that we didn't even know on the utility side. So we actually have applied for, I believe, 2 federal grants in partnership with PGE and Pacific Power, our local utilities. And that process has been so helpful because even if we didn't get the grant, it was a really valuable planning process that led us to learn more things about their side of things. So, through one of these grant applications, we learned that, one option that we were considering would require the charger to be installed by the county and have an inspection and sign off. And that would kind of further gum up this streamlined permit process that we were trying to accomplish. So we actually went a different direction, and we wouldn't have known that if we hadn't been like talking to the utilities kind of constantly and working through all these problems together.
I know I said that was the last question, but there's another question before we move on.
Yeah.
Does payment happen with credit card, or do users need to be signed up with some sort of membership?
Yeah, so right now it is kind of all over the place. This is one of the places where I have been glad to see the federal government kind of stepping in with some standardization through the NEVI program. And we're going to be following their lead. And we haven't finalized any of we haven't entered into negotiations with companies yet. But we are interested in making sure that it is as easy as possible to pay for public charging just by tapping a card or calling a mobile number and making sure that there is not that membership barrier.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That is the final question. Thank you so much again for the presentation. As a reminder, we will be sharing the slides and the recording here. So I noticed some people coming in late. If you missed any part of that, that will be shared with you all. And now we will hear from our final presenter of the afternoon, Michael Graham. Michael?
Hey, hold on a second while I get oriented. All right. Can you see my screen all right?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Well, good afternoon. Thanks for the invitation, and kind of a hard act to follow. Those are some great projects that we heard from. I guess my presentation here is to share a little bit more information about medium duty and heavy duty fleet electrification, and what we see on the ground, and hopefully share some perspectives that you all can take back into your own transportation electrification projects and programs when focusing on medium duty and heavy duty electrification. So I'm Michael Graham, Deputy Director here at Columbia, Willamette and Western Washington Clean Cities Coalition. And we are a part of the greater U.S. Department of Energy Clean Cities program. So very brief overview of my presentation today. I want to give you a little bit of background about Clean Cities. Not a lot of folks are familiar with this organization that's been around for 30 years. And then I'll dive into what we've experienced with medium and heavy duty fleet electrification projects and share some lessons learned for you all. And then we'll wrap up and let you get on with your afternoons. So starting off with an overview of Clean Cities. It's a 30-year-old initiative started by the U.S. Department of Energy with the goal of fostering local partnerships to advance domestic alternative fuel adoption and reduce transportation petroleum consumption. And that was a way back in the early 90s to help improve our domestic energy security, and those local partnerships and nationwide network are now being put to use to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and help folks overcome barriers in adopting cleaner fuels and technologies like electric vehicles. Our coalitions, the Columbia, Willamette and Clean Cities Coalition and the Western Washington Clean Cities Coalition, cover both Oregon and Washington, working with public and private fleets We're a membership-driven and fleet-focused 501c3 not-for-profit, and we help folks adopt cleaner fuels and technologies to achieve their goals, whether those are economic, environmental, or a combination of both. And we do this through what we call our 5 Rs. So reaching diverse decision makers in the fleets and government agencies and clean transportation industry organizations that we work with, reducing barriers to clean fuels and technologies through education, outreach, information sharing, resources, being a resource for that change and collaboration in our region, recognizing some of the leaders in our local, regional, and national clean transportation community, and then really fostering those relationships with our stakeholders and partners. And that's really critical to our success. And we prioritize relationship building as a way to overcome those typical barriers folks experience with alt fuel projects. Some of the work that we do on day-to-day is that regional and national network of peers, connecting folks across our network to help them solve their problems, or if we can't solve a problem or a member of ours can't solve that problem, connect that stakeholder with someone across our network of over 75 coalitions that spans the country. Maybe someone on the East Coast has figured out, why the electric bus cooling pump is not working in a transit fleet. Recognition of those clean fuels and industry leaders through our annual workshops in Oregon and Washington, as well as at our Green Transportation Summit and Expo that Thomas alluded to at the beginning of our call today. Hosting these clean fuels industry events, very outreach focused, ride and drives, workshops on different fuels and technologies, and of course our Green Transportation Summit and Expo. And then a lot of information sharing and technical assistance, emission analyses of clean fuel initiatives, different fuels and technologies, and how those can benefit a fleet. Regulation guidance, especially in Oregon and Washington, as we're starting to see new policies trickle in from what have been deployed in California, like advanced clean trucks, advanced clean cars. In Oregon, there are on-road, medium, and heavy-duty model year titling restrictions. Identifying grants and incentives and pursuing those, training for drivers and maintenance techs, and then helping fleets plan their electrification initiatives to move towards those cleaner fuels. And then more recently, helping members navigate low carbon fuel standards like the Clean Fuel Standard in Oregon, or rather the Clean Fuels Program in Oregon and the Clean Fuel Standard in Washington. Here's a snapshot of some of our members. It's a pretty diverse array of folks, ranging from fuel producers and NGOs to vehicle manufacturers and service providers. But our core membership is really those public and private fleets across Oregon and Washington, who are either just starting to learn about different fuels and technologies like biofuels or electric vehicles, or they're actively deploying these alternatives in their fleet operations today and are leaders in both their peer group and the industry. I wanted to also highlight just a little bit about some of the other work that we do in terms of clean transportation projects and initiatives. So in our spare time, if my presentation will allow, our Clean Cities coalitions are implementing cutting edge clean transportation projects, both here in the Pacific Northwest region and across the country. So we're currently managing 3 US EPA Diesel Emission Reduction Act, or DERA awards, electrifying goods movement in refrigerated fleets in Oregon and Washington, package delivery operations, installing exhaust retrofit systems for minority construction firm fleets to comply with on-road titling restrictions in Oregon, and funding some of the first electric equipment, including yard trucks for UPS here in Portland, and rail car movers for steel mills. And then last year, we secured our first ever US Department of Energy funded program called Empower, which stands for Equitable Mobility Powering Opportunities for Workplace Electrification Readiness, which is why we have an acronym. And this program is really geared towards outreach and education and capacity building in workplaces, especially those located in or employing members of historically disinvested communities, to help those workplaces overcome some of the more basic barriers to installing workplace charging, figuring out like what chargers are best for them, coordinating electricians to do the work, and identifying grants and other incentives to help overcome those costs. And we're leveraging over 30 Clean Cities coalitions across the country to do this work, which is the largest number of Clean Cities coalitions on the single DOE VTO program in DOE's history. More locally in Oregon, at least where there have been these grant programs available for folks to apply and pursue electric medium and heavy duty funding projects. We've secured over $9.3 million for our members to deploy some of the first electric drayage trucks, electric motor coaches, and off-road equipment, as well as just some basic clean diesel replacements using renewable diesel, which is a 60 to 80% reduction in life cycle greenhouse gas emissions compared to conventional diesel. And over the 20 projects that were funded, 9 of those were for Clean Cities coalitions, and there are another 2 rounds of this funding. So if your fleet operator is looking to apply, let's chat and see if we can put in an application for even clean diesel replacements or electric trucks. And then, as Thomas mentioned, we produced the region's largest clean transportation event in the Green Transportation Summit Expo. It's a 12-year-old show. It first started in a machine parts shop in Portland, Oregon, but has quickly grown to bring a national audience and is hosted in Tacoma annually. And I think last year we talked over 700 attendees. We had all of the major truck manufacturers there with their electric trucks. And that was our largest conference to date. Even at the Ride and Drive that's hosted at the LeMay Auto Museum, I think we had over 300 people attend. And this event really allows us to bring national speakers, vehicle technologies, and industry news home to the Pacific Northwest and really arm our members and stakeholders with the information on what's going on in the cutting edge of the clean fuels and transportation industry. I will say that registration is now open, and early bird pricing, I think, was extended to May. So get your passes, and if you're a Clean Cities member, get 50% off and a free complimentary pass. All right, on to the meat of our discussion, medium and heavy duty fleet electrification. And I'll start by laying some of the groundwork of what vehicles we are typically working with in the medium and heavy duty space, followed by some of the basics in medium heavy duty charging, right sizing, fleet charging based upon different fleet characteristics, some of the real world examples of the cost for this infrastructure that we've experienced, what fleets really need from utilities. And hopefully from this type of walkthrough, there are some lessons learned and information that you can take back to your own fleet electrification initiatives internally. So let's start with the basics. What vehicles are we really working with in the medium and heavy duty space? So using FHWA's federal highway weight classes, you're looking at any on-road vehicle that is over 10,000 pounds fully loaded, and that's referred to as the gross vehicle weight rating, or GVWR. You'll see that there's everything from your typical box truck that you rent from your local U-Haul to your utility bucket trucks that are in the true medium duty class that ranges from 10,000 to 26,000 pounds for a fully loaded vehicle. The medium duty and heavy duty break really occurs at that 26,000 pounds mark, which is where you can start to include some of the bigger school buses, larger box trucks, your city transit buses, garbage trucks, and of course your standard heavy duty trucks that you see on the road, both the long haul sleeper cabs, semi tractor trailers, as well as the more regional haul, what they call a day cab tractor that doesn't have that sleeper cab component to it. And then you also don't want to forget about off-road equipment, where there's actually a lot more mature options for electrification than what we've seen in the on-road segment. And I'm talking about some of those more heavier lift forklifts that you typically find as diesel today, as well as other cargo handling equipment like yard trucks and even rail car movers and ground support equipment at airports. When it comes to charging, I think it's also helpful to really ground ourselves in what we're talking about with medium and heavy duty charging. So you're traditionally looking at 50 kilowatts and up from a charger power rating perspective. And these are direct current fast chargers or DC fast chargers that require 3-phase power, as opposed to your typical level 2 chargers that can get by with just 2-phase power that plug into your dryer outlet in your home. Some of the higher rating level 2 chargers, like 19.2 kilowatts, is about the highest rating you get with level 2 before you get into the DC fast charging range. Those higher level 2 chargers, you can charge a medium or a heavy duty vehicle. There are some medium heavy duty vehicles like Thomas Built's all electric Julie school bus that only take a DC fast charger. But I guess where I'm going with this is that when you do charge a medium or heavy duty vehicle on a level 2 charger, it's going to take a long time because it's for two reasons. One, the power output's just not enough juice, right? You need more flow and more pressure to actually fill up the battery. And then you're also trying to charge what is a much larger battery with your medium and heavy duty vehicles. And to put that in perspective, I think your standard Model 3 Tesla has about 60 kilowatt hour battery, something like that. 60 kilowatt hour battery, and an e-Cascadia heavy duty truck is at 438 kilowatt hours. So I mean, you're trying to put juice into a much bigger tank. When you do move into that 50, if you were to try to charge a medium or heavy duty truck on a level 2 charger, let's say that e-Cascadia, you're going to be charging for about 17 hours. Or I think that was what I said there, right? Can't see it. Yeah, 17 hours and 45 minutes, which is a long time if you're a fleet operator to charge an electric truck. But then if you start to move into the 50 kilowatt range, you're reduced to about 7 hours for that e-Cascadia scenario, or 2 hours when you get to the 150 kilowatt charger, and just an hour with 350 kilowatts. I'll just caveat that not all of the medium and heavy duty vehicles that are on the market today can take 350 kilowatts, but the industry is moving towards that higher charging capacity rating. And one of the reasons for that is because as a fleet operator, one of the biggest issues with electric vehicles that fleet operators are thinking about is that downtime for charging, for two reasons. The first one is that the cargo is not moving, so you're not making money. And the second one is that your employee is also not working, which is a huge cost suck. So it's really important to right-size charging with the vehicles that fleets are adopting today, so that they can optimize that uptime, and the economic and environmental value proposition of electric vehicles can be realized for those fleet operators. So as the industry is moving towards those higher capacity charging stations, you also start to encounter, a big issue, right? Those higher capacity charging stations are very expensive, and for the utility, it's a lot of juice that you're trying to use to charge those vehicles all at once. And so what we've found is that by kind of optimizing and right-sizing that charging setup, you can kind of mitigate both of those issues and find kind of a happy medium. And one of the models that we've seen and used in some recent grant applications is by looking at really high-powered dual port DC fast chargers that can split their power output between two vehicles for overnight charging. And then if needed, they can focus all of that power output into one vehicle for a quick top off. And some of the considerations to think about when you're right sizing for fleet charging are the route model and duration. So whether you're returning to base if you're returning to the same base after a vehicle shift, and if you're going to slip seat, which means that as soon as you return that truck or so to the fleet base, a new driver is going to get right back in the truck and take it on a new route. That's a really tough situation to deal with because there's typically very little downtime for that type of unit. And then another situation would be whether that vehicle is returning to another base, in which case you have to look at installing chargers at both locations. And then long haul, which is really not feasible today with the amount of distance that those long haul tractor trailers, semi trucks are traveling. Battery size is a big piece. How much time does it take to actually charge that large of a battery? The time between the vehicle shifts that I alluded to in the different route models and durations. And then what's the future fleet build out look like? That dual port model that I mentioned is really advantageous because maybe you don't need both of the ports. You don't need all of the ports at this point in time, but in the future, as you start to phase in more electric, medium, and heavy duty vehicles, those existing ports are going to save you, future infrastructure costs because you now have them available. We experienced this actually with a recent grant success in Oregon. So there was a one-time pilot program that awarded just over 13 million for zero emission fueling infrastructure for medium and heavy duty fleets. And I think we secured around 3.5 million for some member projects, about 4 in Oregon. That was like 24% of the total funding. But what I really wanted to touch on from this success story is that this charging infrastructure is really expensive. So when you're talking about the number of ports or chargers that we installed, it was only 20 chargers, all DC fast chargers, and they were all dual ports, 40 ports. And on average, the cost per charger was around $101,000 when you're just looking at the charger unit cost. And that cost would have been the same for the per port amount, right? If they were all single port chargers. But because we utilized that dual port model, we were able to have that cost per port. Again, still wildly expensive. And then the make-ready infrastructure costs alone were about $115,000 per charger, or about $60,000 per port. And then when you bake both of those cost categories together, it was something like $217,000 per charger, or $108,000 per port. And for some of these projects, just to kind of put this in perspective, we were working with at least one scenario where the fleet had a bare gravel yard, so no concrete to tear up. That's a major cost with that make-ready infrastructure portion. And the utility, I think, which was Pacific Power in this instance, already had existing level 3 juice available to the site, so minimal utility side upgrades. And the cost was still something about around 1.2 million for an 8 dual port charger setup. And we had looked at, I believe, 180 kilowatt rating chargers for that situation. So these costs are just insane right now. But we do see the industry starting to reduce those costs as some of the supply chain disruptions are mitigated, as well as seeing this type of technology scale. But grant funding is really critical to making it pencil right now. When we work through these projects, originally there was not this one-time pilot program from Oregon DEQ, and some of the common barriers that we experienced when trying to navigate electrification for these fleets led us to some lessons learned that I think could apply for utilities. So one of the big pieces is that we didn't quite know what the clear steps were for utility approval of a project if the fleet was just going to install that infrastructure on their own. So having like a really clear bulleted list of we need this, we need that, you need to send this information to this person or department, that's really critical just to iron out the process and make it easier for fleets, which are juggling a lot of things to move forward with their infrastructure project. Access to information about site availability for 3-phase power. So again, medium heavy duty fleet electrification, we talked about, really needs that 3-phase power to charge vehicles in a timely manner that works for the fleet. And some of the basic information about whether that site has 3-phase power or not is going to require a fleet to go look for an electrician to figure that out. And so if there is an easily accessible map that kind of shows that for a fleet, they can collect that information on their own and move into the next step of their infrastructure process. This is a really tough one, I know. Access to quick estimates of utility side upgrades for proposed electrification projects, just like a ballpark number that fleets can chew on if they're looking at applying for a grant or they're coordinating with their electrician to get a total cost estimate for the project, and decide on some key questions about, like, should we be looking at lower capacity chargers? Should we be looking at higher capacity chargers, or could we? That kind of cost information is really helpful to kind of make key decisions in the project scope. Connections to local electricians and suppliers that can assist with their project. And the key one here is electricians and suppliers that are also familiar with navigating both the utility process and the electric vehicle space. It's a really tough one to find a good partner for that. And we found that a lot of folks don't know who to talk to. So having that kind of information could be very helpful. And then connections to trusted allies to support fleets in their project. That could be us as Clean Cities. It could be other partners in your network that can help these fleets kind of guide them through that fleet electrification project from start to finish. And then of course funding, but I don't want to throw that as number one, because I think most of you already know that that's a big barrier. And with that, I'm all wrapped up, and I wanted to provide some space for questions. And if you'd like me to go back to any of these slides, happy to do it. And I'll make sure that this presentation is available for you all. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Michael. And we have opened the floor for questions. If you have any questions, same as the last time, please raise your hands or unmute and ask Michael your questions. Hands from Coral.
Thank you very much for your presentation as well, Michael. When you talk about utilities and costs and getting rough estimates to install this three-phase infrastructure, I mean, obviously that's near and dear to our world. And I just want to point out that, yes, certainly cost, that's been the focus for the last several years. But I really want to reiterate the issues that utilities are having with supply chain constraints and actually getting infrastructure. I mean, it's not even enough to pay for the infrastructure anymore. We're looking at lead times of, you know, a year and a half.
Just for transformers, right?
No, not, it used to be just for transformers. In 2021, transformers were the issue. And now it's like every piece of material from the connectors that go inside the larger vaults that are required for the three-phase infrastructure, to the conduit for the cable, to the elbows to terminate the cable. Just a couple weeks ago, I was privy to a quote for just some secondary compression connectors that we used to be able to get in a matter of a couple weeks. And now we're looking at a 15-month lead time.
Holy.
So I just want to caution everybody that it does not appear to be getting better when it comes to the supply chain constraints that the utilities are working with. In our conversations with the American Public Power Association, Northwest Public Power Association, they've indicated that they don't see any improvements coming probably for the next 2 to 3 years. But I wouldn't even be surprised if it's longer than that, because I'm not sure exactly what's going to change in the next 2 to 3 years. So I don't want to be a negative doom and gloomer, but that is the situation that the utilities are in right now. And we're just very concerned that we are going to have difficulty getting the equipment here that we need just to keep the lights on. So I just wanted to throw that out there for your consideration or comment.
Yeah, very much appreciate it on our ends. We've done a little bit of work with Seattle State Light, and just some of the conversations around like basic transformer delays is just obscene. I'm sorry you'll have to go through that. I will say that maybe a silver lining is that the delays on the fleet side are just as bad. I mean, orders for like basic switch gears for panel upgrades was, I think, 14 plus months. Vehicles, you know, we've had an electric garbage truck on order for almost 2 years by the time it gets delivered in August. So hopefully that provides the breathing room, but very much a healthy appreciation for getting you all the information well in advance of what folks are thinking about doing.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Coral. Any additional questions for Michael? I know we are short on time, but we still have time for a question. Thomas.
Thank you. Not so much a question as a comment. I just want to plug Clean Cities. BEF has been a member for a couple of years. So worth the membership. It's not an expensive membership. And I think if you just watching Michael's presentation, it's clear that having access to the information in the network through Clean Cities is really helpful if you are thinking about medium or heavy duty electric vehicles. So Michael, always great presentation. Thank you for joining and for giving us your perspective.
Totally. Yeah, happy to do it. And we're not trying to bash anyone. I just wanted to share what we're experiencing, and hopefully it's useful. Yeah, we're here to help solve problems.